So I agreed, and they looked at it, and I'll never forget, I went to Los Angeles. I had been living in Los Angeles for a number of years prior to making Fear No Evil, but went back to upstate New York. I grew up in Rochester to shoot the film, and then decided I wanted to edit the picture in New York City, in Manhattan, because I'd never lived in Manhattan. I wanted to be in New York, in the city, to edit the picture. So I had a nice little apartment on the east side in New York, and I'd walk to Movie Lab every day on Lexington and 44th to work with my editor, Edna Ruth Paul, and then walk back. It was a great year in New York. Saw everything on the Broadway stage, and it was a fabulous year cutting the picture. But then Charlie said, go to California and screen the picture. They want to see it. So I took the work print to California from New York, and the AVCO executive set up a screening at CFI, the laboratory, and I insisted upon being there. And I sat in the back, and Bob Ramey, the head of the company, and all the rest of the guys there. Mick Garris was head of publicity at the time at AVCO Embassy. He was there. Lindsay Duran, who later went on to produce and became a vice president in charge of production at Paramount. She was also, I think, involved with publicity, or very lower echelon, lower level executive there. And Don Borchers, who wound up being the, quote, associate producer on the picture. I'll tell you that happened. And I'm sitting at the back, and the picture's unspooling, and the reaction's pretty blasé. I'm not getting much of a reaction at all. Nothing. So I'm kind of happy, because I don't want to make this deal. I want to go back. I agreed to one screening. I want to go back and tell Charlie, or have them tell Charlie, no, we're not interested. I say, okay, one screening. Now you got to go raise the rest of the money so I can finish the movie. So we're almost toward the end of the picture, and what happens? The dead people. The dead people happen. The dead people start to come out of the ground. And as soon as the dead people start to come out of the ground, Bob Ramey, the first peep I've heard through the whole fucking screening, shouts, I can sell that. And that was it. So as soon as he saw the dead people, he was convinced he could sell the picture, and they wanted the picture, and that was it. And I had to make the deal. And that meant re-editing the picture, working with their guy, Donald P. Borchers, to re-edit the picture with them to their satisfaction. And that's how that happened.
So before we get into the nuts and bolts of the film, if you had to say, describe the plot of Fear No Evil to someone who had never seen it, what would you say it's about?
About 93 minutes long. I hate that angle. How many times do I have to tell you not to use that profile? I'm telling you, David, I'll get you if you use that profile. Don't do it.
So, obviously, as a gay Italian who attended Catholic school myself, the film has a special place in my heart. So, and I think even though you are not particularly fond of how the film turned out, it feels very personal in certain ways. So are there personal elements and experiences that you were drawing from?
Oh, yeah. Well, a lot of gay angst in that movie, big time. And I was 25 years old, okay, when we started shooting that picture. And by the time it was released, I was 26. And I was in the closet, completely in the closet. But to make matters even more complicated, I was completely, totally devoted and in love with a woman. I loved her with all of my heart, dearly. And we had been together for we knew each other. She was my high school sweetheart, actually. We had been together in high school, and then she broke up with me, I think sophomore year or freshman year. Then we got together again. She broke my heart like 3 times in high school, And then one day I'm prepping Fear No Evil. I'm back in upstate New York, and we're getting in pre-production and looking, and driving across the Bay Bridge in upstate New York, connecting two little communities, suburban communities, and there she is. I recognize her from the back of her head. I can see her through the back window of her car in front of me. I hadn't seen her or spoken to her in years. So I pull up and I say, like this, we pull off and boom, we're in love. Problem is, she's married, she's got a kid, but she doesn't want to be married to this guy, so she divorces the guy. We're in love, and she comes, works on the picture with me. And so here I am with my being completely in love with this girl, with this woman, and yet not entirely heterosexual by any means. So it was complicated. It was really tough. I mean, at the time, it was just hell. It really was. And then finally, when we wrapped up the film, and I went back to LA to re-edit the film, I finally told her, because we were talking merits, and I said, look, I got to tell you something. We can't do this unless you know something about me. And I said, here's the truth. And she said, she was shocked. And she said, well, do you think you can stop? And I said, I don't think so. And I was being honest. And so I don't know what I expected her to say at that point. Well, I do. I expected her. She was just a lovely person, but she wasn't that open-minded. What woman would be, quite frankly? It'd be difficult. I mean, there are women, I suppose. Bisexuality wasn't even anything remotely. It wasn't a thought, in that era. You were either gay or you were straight, and I didn't feel that way. I felt I leaned much more toward my sexuality was much more gay than anything else. But I loved her dearly. So anyway, that ended that. And so all of that conflict was happening throughout Fear No Evil. And I think it's reflected in the film. But what really kills me is when there are some people that I've read some things about it being possibly homophobic. It's anything but that, in my estimation. I mean, it's a coming-of-age story, right? I didn't realize that just about everything that's ever interested me, story-wise, has that element to it. I never thought of Lady that way until they started to refer to Lady. I'm talking about critics as a or anybody who wrote about it, as a coming-of-age story. I never thought of Fear No Evil that way. But Fear No Evil was really my coming-of-age story in a lot of ways, And so all of that angst, all of that confusion is reflected in the film, I think.
So yeah, that's really fascinating that you tell that story, because it plays out literally on screen, sort of. So,
yeah.
Were you conscious of that at the time, or is that something that you look back on and you're like, wow, I was really working through this, and it just sort of came out on screen?
No, I was certainly conscious of what I was going through on a personal level, I think that more so as the film was coming together in the edit, I realized I wanted to make a personal film, but I didn't want to make it this personal. You know what I'm saying? I wanted to make it personal to me, but man, this is really personal. And I think that I started to realize that as it all started to come together in the cutting room. But when the film works and it's powerful at times, it can be. It's that aspect of it, I think, more than anything else, that drives it, beyond the norm, and in a good way, in a cinematic way, and in a compelling way. But some people have referred to it as being homophobic. I remember that the LA Times review was actually a fairly good review of the film when it opened. And the critic, I'll have to paraphrase here, said something like that. She said the film was beautiful and melodramatic, beautifully shot, that sort of thing. She said, yeah, we have to consider the fact that the lead character that the film may be homophobic because the lead character appears to be gay, and he's, after all, the devil incarnate. so, and if the filmmaker did not intend that to be the case, then I apologize. Well, I certainly did not. I mean, the truth, I've just told you what the truth was, but actually was, but I don't know. That's where things were at with me personally when I was making Fear No Evil.
Well, and we talked to a lot of people who view Fear No Evil very favorably. It's kind of regarded now as something of a queer cult classic, despite many of those things obviously being more subtext than text. The shower scene really sticks out though, because it's pretty provocative even today. Was there anything more explicit in the original treatment of the film, and was that scene,
No, I don't. Explicit. You mean sexually explicit? I guess that's what you mean. No.
Or even anything just more explicitly queer, because I mean, even that gay kiss that happens in there, you don't see that very often in films.
No. And I think I realized when I wrote that and decided that we were going to shoot that it was going to happen, that it was going to be somewhat controversial, But again, you have to think about it within as within the context of what I've just told you as to what I was going to. The other thing about that shower scene that kills me is that some people just don't get the fact that it's Andrew who's compelling this, but Tony's latent, homosexuality is because, he hates women, right? This guy, this thug, Tony, he's latently homosexual is what he's all about. He's a bully, Lots of these bullies are, right? They can't face their own sexuality, and so they take it out on others in this manner. But a lot of people don't get the fact that they can't separate from the kiss because of their own issues, each and every one of them, but both are contributing to that. Maybe it's a little too, maybe I wasn't clear enough, or maybe it wasn't meant to be, clear. But that's what I was thinking, And Tony's character, as he was structured to play throughout the film, was as conflicted as Andrew was as a character, in my opinion.
I think it comes through, especially more, I think audiences are a little more refined in their thinking about films now, especially looking back. So I think fans like me and other people do see that. It does come through in the film. I'm a bit curious, how did you get the film distributed with that scene intact? Did anyone raise any...
Nobody said a damn thing about it. No, I thought, really, you would think, especially during that era, nobody said a damn thing about it. In fact, when we were recutting the film, Dom Borchers, who was, again, a low-level executive at AVCO, and he happened to be assigned to the picture, they assigned him, to work with me to recut the picture, take it through post-production. And there were all kinds of things that he wanted changed, and I remember... mostly, he was compelling me to do these things because he said Raimi wanted them to happen, the head of the studio. Otherwise, Raimi wasn't going to be happy. Otherwise, the picture might not see, the kind of release I'd like it to see. And one of the things he said at one point was that he wanted to dump the seduction scene. I'd been fighting with him about it, where Andrew approaches Gabrielle, the young girl, and appears in this dreamlike state in her room, and seduces her, right? Remember that scene in the film? So he wanted to lift that scene, he said, because Bob Raimi hated the scene. The head of the studio hated the scene. So finally I caught on to what was going on here. This was a bit of a ways into the process of restructuring the picture. By then I was pulling my hair out and really having a terrible time trying to hang on to the film. But I said, Don, I'll tell you what, I said, you leave that scene in, I'll give you an associate producer's credit on the film. Oh, you will? Yeah, because he'd alluded to the fact, more than alluded. He'd made me aware of the fact that what he wanted to do was produce movies. So I said, you got an associate producer's credit on the film, which meant he got paid ads as well. That's what he wanted me to guarantee him. And so he said, great. And suddenly, Bob Raby's problem with the scene disappeared, and Dear Don Borchers launched his producing career. And you should go look up his credits. You may know who he is, but because he did produce a bunch of terrible movies, horror films, so to speak. That was how Don Borchers' producing career was launched. The scene stayed in, and he got his associate producer's credit.
So do you think the show is an issue because straight audiences and producers, for example, and executives, Andrew is supposed to be the villain? To them, in their eyes, Andrew is the villain, so it was fine that scene was the way it was.
Maybe there were a couple of gay executives at the studio. If it did come up, they said, no, this could be exploitable, in some way. I don't know why. I thought that if anything, that would be the scene that they'd want recut or removed. I don't know how you could recut that scene. That they'd want removed if I were to make a deal with the studio. But never, I really don't know. They never said anything about that scene. Closet cases. They're all closet cases.
It is so wild. I mean, it's the most crazy shower scene besides Carrie. The frontal, I mean, it's shocking. Like I said, it's shocking even today. So, bravo on you for getting it in there. Keeping it.
Oh, let me say this. Guess where that was shot? At my old junior high school. This was, we didn't tell them. We shot the gymnasium scene at my Spry Junior High. I'm not sure if it's still a junior high school, but I went to junior high there. And I was, their alumni, Frank, they knew who I was, I'd gone to school there. Anything you want, Frank? Sure. So the first day of the shoot, what I do, we go in there and we shoot this shower scene, with all these naked guys in the shower, they're kissing. They didn't know anything about it, of course, until the film was released. But again, I didn't hear anything from them. They in that regard, what could they have said at that point? It was done. At that point, it had happened. But I didn't hear anything from them. But that's where I shot it in my junior high. It was the first day of the show, too.
Oh God, that's a big one to start with.
Yeah. Nice way to break the ice.
So religious themes always have a place in horror. This film is rife with them, obviously, and I assume that you were probably raised Catholic. So why do you think religion makes for good horror movies?
The iconography. I mean, it's so frightening. It really is. Catholicism, all the iconography surrounding Catholicism. I mean, all the great Renaissance masters, you see so much of it reflected in their paintings, their works, their sculptures. A good deal of that has to do with the fact that the church were among the wealthiest patrons, so they could afford to pay these guys and keep them going. So they had to, their subject matter, they were like major studios telling these brilliant masters, you have to do this, you have to do this, you have to give me another Virgin with Child, another whatever, all of that stuff was inspired by biblical scenes, and the church was behind this stuff financially. So, as a kid, the iconography, it fascinated me. It always did. The doctrine confused me, and I never bought into the doctrine, even as a kid. I found it very difficult to believe. As a matter of fact, this great story. Prior to making my first Holy Communion, as an Italian Catholic boy, of course, I didn't go to Catholic school. I went to public school, but we were marched off during the week, once a week, to catechism class at the local Catholic school. There's a scene in Lady in White, as a matter of fact, with the kids all filed 2 by 2 and the nuns leading them. Well, what they do is break us out of public school, instead of it 2:30 in the afternoon or whatever it was, 3:30, at 2 o'clock, and these two nuns would show up, and the Catholic kids going to public school, the bell would ring, and you'd be excused, and then they'd walk us down in file, 2 by 2, to the Catholic school, where even more horrors would erupt with the nuns there. And we'd have to stay there and learn catechism for an hour or so, maybe a little bit more. But when I was a kid, prior to my first Holy Communion, and my family was Italian-American, and most of my parents' friends were Italian-American, or first-generation Italians. And so we would go to my parents' friends' homes, and if they had kids maybe a little older than me, or around my same age, or a little older, who had already made their first Holy Communion, they always had photos of their first Holy Communion on the mantles, with the kid kneeling at the pew like this, right, with his hands in the prayer position, and with this kind of, with a missal or rosary, around his wrist or her wrist. And then behind him was God. God was always behind these kids. It was a black and white photo, and there was God, Jesus, God. He was always there in the photo. The kid was sitting on this single pew, at a professional photo studio. These were taken like this, and there was God. So I thought, well, that's the day you meet him, because he's there in all the photos. You see him. Here's my buddy Donald. And that's the day that when they take your first Holy Communion photo, you meet God, because he's there in the photos. So they walked me in to have my first Holy Communion photo taken at the professional photographer. He kneels me down in the pew, gives me a missal, instructs me to put my hands together like this. I'm looking around. When is he going to show up? Where's God? Jesus, God. And then the photographer steps behind me, and he pulls down this shade like that, and it's a painted image, of God, with the Holy Host. Jesus with the Holy, and the look, that photo sat in my parents' living room for years, of course, in a nice frame, and the look on my face is like, no, it's all a fucking joke. And that was the moment, I think, when I said, this ain't for me. No God.
Did your family have any, did your parents have any commentary, or anybody in your family, on you making a satanic horror movie?
Well, my mother really was a very difficult woman, very simple woman. My dad had passed on prior to, as did my cousin Charlie's dad, prior to Fear No Evil. So I think my mother was clueless. She was clueless about just about everything. So she just thought it was wonderful that her son made a movie. My nickname was Babe when I was, oh, Babe, that's nice. I'm glad you did that, Babe. Look at Babe. Yeah, everybody loves the movie. And I thought, thanks, Mom. With Lady in White, it was a different story. Lady in White, I didn't tell anybody. So much of the film was autobiographical. And so my relatives, the living relatives, primarily aunts, the women who had married the LaLoggias. My father had two brothers, John and Joseph, but they'd all died prior to Lady. But I remember when we screened the film at the George Eastman House in Rochester. We had a number of screenings for the backers before a deal was made. Any deals were made for distribution in the States. And my aunts came and other people related. They had no idea that they would be seeing my grandparents as portrayed by Renata Vanni and Angelo Bertolini, Mama and Papa in the film, and my father as portrayed by Alex Rex, as a matter of fact. And all of those characters were virtually characters that I embraced and loved and dearly in my life, or had influenced me in my early years. Miss Ladella, Donald, Louis, the two brats, that locked Frankie in the cloakroom. And I remember my aunts walking out of the theater, and they had tears rolling down their eyes, because can you imagine the shock of that, going in and seeing their husband or their their in-laws, people they loved dearly that had passed on, suddenly seeing them portrayed, within the context of the storytelling and not knowing anything about it. So it moved them completely. All my mother had to say was, "How come you made me dead?" Because Frankie's mom has passed on in the film. So my mother was beautiful to grab. How come you made me dead? Everybody, I said, Ma, it's just a story. I said, because the story demanded, you couldn't explain anything like that to her. So I said, well, that was just a story, Ma. It had to be that way because the story had to be that way. Ay. But Mama and Papa in that film, this really pisses me off. Occasionally I'll come across a review of Lady in White and they'll say that the Italian grandparents are stereotypical. Oh, my fanculo. I lived that life. These two people, as portrayed in the film, that was Papa Charlie and Mama Assunta. My Papa Charlie and Mama Assunta. We, as kids, we pulled that stunt on poor Papa Charlie repeatedly with the smoking. We got him in trouble repeatedly. And their relationship was, and they spoke in this manner, And as a matter of fact, in broken English, they were not first generation. They were it, My father was first generation. He was born in Palermo. They brought him over when he was 6 months old. But they spoke. My grandparents, Papa Charlie and Mama Assunta, spoke that way. And when Lynn Stallmaster was hired by me to cast the film, Lynn was, of course, perhaps the best known casting director in Hollywood, one of the finest, if not the finest. I told him, I said, I don't want to see any actors who are going to give me some sort of fake Italian accent. We've got to find the real thing. And he understood completely. And we were fortunate to come up with these two. And they were wonderful together. But come on, that's the way it was, guys, that was my life, those people were my life. And I miss them dearly.
So I do want to get into Lady in White. I have a few more questions about Fear No Evil first.
Okay.
So obviously the film, can you tell us a bit about Stefan Angren? Because the film really rests on his performance. So what was it like working with him? How did you find him?
Okay. Stefan, obviously I read any number of actors for, I can't remember who at this point, although I do have some audition tapes of mostly the local actors that we auditioned in Rochester, because we had a very limited budget, obviously, and I couldn't cast and bring everybody, professional actors, from LA back to Rochester, where we shot the entire film in the Thousand Islands and in and around Rochester, New York, where I grew up. But I knew that Stefan was going to have to be, or the actor portraying Andrew was going to have to be a professional actor that could really carry the film. And Stefan, I can't think of anybody else who even came close, and I can't remember who else might have read. My experience with Stefan, I guess I'll just tell you the truth. You decide what you want to do with it, okay? But it's the truth. I didn't know this at the time, but he was a heroin addict. And he brought with him to the location Thea Constantine, who was Michael Constantine's daughter. They were an item, and they were both heroin addicts. So we had to deal with that throughout the course of making the film. Recently, again, when I watched the Scream Factory release of Fear No Evil, they had asked me to participate, and I refused to do so unless they paid me a decent amount of money. They didn't want to pay me, and so I said goodbye. And so they got Stefan to sit down and do an interview, or I think he said this I watched either the interview or I think he even did a commentary track. I'm not sure, but at some point he relays this story about how the crew was about to, they were about to mutiny because of the conditions. It was cold and they weren't being paid enough, blah, 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 blah. And so they were all staying at a hotel, a local motel together. The same, not all of the crew, but a number of members of the crew were at this hotel where Stefan was staying there. And that he had to call me to go to the hotel because he was concerned that if I didn't get there and calm everybody down, that people were going to walk. And